Name me the last really tired person that was super smiley, happy, and joyful, because you probably can't. The whole idea of happiness, the whole idea of joy, of feeling exuberance, of feeling good feelings, all of it gets tamped down if you haven't slept well, because your body can't actually react in a positive way. What's very interesting is the more sleep deprived you are, the more negative emotions seem to stack on board, right? And so what I try to explain to people is when you're sleep deprived, you can't experience the level of positivity in the emotion to get to joy. And that is what becomes problematic.
Welcome to the Bountiful Podcast. I'm Shan, and this is a space for curious, thoughtful conversations about what it really means to live a bountiful life. In a world that often rewards more, faster, and louder, Bountiful exists to slow things down, to explore joy, resilience, creativity, and the small choices that shape how we live every day. Each episode is a conversation with someone who's thought deeply about life, work, health, money, relationships, or purpose, and what they've learned along the way. If you're looking for ideas you can actually live with, you're in the right place. In this episode, we explore sleep with Dr. Michael Breus. He's a clinical psychologist and board-certified sleep specialist. He's also known as the sleep doctor. In this conversation, we look at how sleep underpins how we feel, think, and live. If there's one thing I've learned through exploring what it means to live a bountiful life, it's that sleep is king. And yet most of us don't give it nearly enough attention. We move past basic sleep hygiene and unpack sleep anxiety, common myths, understanding your sleep chronotype, and why sleep is highly personal, flexible, and not one size fits all. We also talk about navigating different sleep patterns with a partner, where to start amid all of the wellness noise, and which fundamentals actually matter when you're trying to improve your sleep in real life. Sleep has such a tremendous impact on our ability to experience joy and how we see the world. And after my own sleep journey over the last 4 years, I've come to believe that something as simple as your pillow can make more difference than you think. Let's dive in. Dr. Breus, welcome to the Bountiful Podcast.
Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here. Let's talk about some sleep.
We could all do with a lot more sleep, I think.
Absolutely. How did you sleep last night?
You know what? I actually slept really well, but I think it was about 10 minutes too short.
See, I have this effect on people. So the night before you're having me on the pod, I have this effect. I can magically work my way through the internet and get people to sleep better. So I'm glad it worked on you.
Can you magically get everyone to sleep better all the time?
Oh, wouldn't that be fantastic? Oh my gosh, I really would. It's funny you say that, because sleep is such an interesting topic, because everybody sleeps, right? Or doesn't, as the case may be. And it's really hard. I think a lot of people feel like there's some big mysteries involved in sleep, or they feel like maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I should be taking more supplements. There's a lot of questions out there about sleep. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to answer questions for you and for your audience, and kind of, see where people are at.
Yeah, awesome. Can you share a little bit about your upbringing and background?
So I was born in Sandy Springs, Georgia, believe it or not. That's in, I know most people are like, what? Just outside Atlanta, Georgia. And I grew up there my whole life. I went to undergraduate in New York, and then did my graduate school work at the University of Georgia. And I got my PhD in clinical psychology. Now, some of your listeners might be saying, hold on a second. I thought we were talking to a sleep doctor, not a clinical psychologist. So actually, it turns out I'm both. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and then I did something that was kind of crazy. I took the medical boards without going to medical school and passed. I'm one of 168 people in the world who've ever done it, and I did it just in sleep. So I have all of the learnings from PhD world, and then I have the learnings from the medical boards to really get a good handle on what is sleep, what is insomnia. So I really feel comfortable saying that I understand the biology as well as the psychology of sleep, because I feel like those are both pretty big components when we're talking about sleep in general.
By the look of my questions that I've done for you today, I totally agree. Can I just ask, why sleep? Why did you decide to go all the way to that I don't know, it's quite an intense degree of sort of study and whatnot to do that.
It really is. It's funny that you say that. So if I'm honest, it wasn't my first choice. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about sleep at all. So I'll tell you a kind of funny story. So when you get a PhD and you work for 4 years and you write a dissertation, then you go out into the world and you do what's called a residency program. And so very similar to an MD would do, you go and basically you take the stuff you learned in school and you practice it in the real world. So when I was at the University of Georgia, my big area of study was sports psychology. So I wanted to know how to work with athletes and have them throw the ball, harder and run faster and all this cool stuff surrounding sports. So when I graduated, I was looking for a residency in sport psychology. I didn't even know you could do something in sleep. The number one residency in sports psychology was, believe it or not, at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi, of all places, right? And I couldn't get in. I didn't go to Harvard or to Princeton or to Yale. I went to Georgia. It was a top 20 program, but it wasn't Harvard. But they had a special one position available, fully funded in the sleep laboratory. And I said, well, just because you're not going to let me in through the front door does not mean that I'm not coming in through the back door. So I sold myself as a sleep guy and went to the internship. And here's what I thought I was going to do is I figured once I get there, I'll just transfer from the sleep lab over to the sports psychology department. So no problem, right? So I get in, I get accepted, day one, raise my hand. Yes, Dr. Breus, I'd like to find out about transferring over to the sports psychology department. And they said, we had a feeling that you were going to want to do that. So here's the deal. Your funding, so the money that you make is only available if you work in the sleep lab, but you don't have to work there the whole year. 6 months will cover everything that you need to do. Then you can take the additional 6 months and go to any part of our program that you want. I was like, this is fantastic. How tough could this be? I mean, it's sleep, right? Like everybody sleeps. I mean, this can't be that hard. So I get into the sleep lab. I got to tell you something, Sean. By day 3, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine. And I'll tell you why. I help people this fast. It's unbelievable. When you're a clinical psychologist, and let's say you're talking with somebody who's got depression or anxiety, it could take weeks, months, even years before you see any kind of treatment gains whatsoever. There are people out there, I help them in under 24 hours. And to be clear, when you change your sleep, you change your life. It's unbelievable. And I get such a kick out of it. It's so much fun. I work with patients and they're so grateful. They come up to me afterwards and like, Michael, you don't understand. You changed my life. And I'm like, yeah, the last 4 people that came in here told me the same thing. And, it's great when you have the opportunity as a doctor to help people almost every single time that you're with them, right? It's so rare that it gets a chance to do it. So I really fell in love with the idea of helping people sleep. Also, if I'm being really honest, it's a great topic at a cocktail party. If I was a podiatrist, nobody would be asking me any questions. But the second anybody figures out I'm a sleep doctor, my wife, she rolls her eyes and walks to the bar because she knows what's about to happen is I'm just going to get inundated with sleep questions, which I kind of like to do.
This is a cheeky question and a bit off topic, but if you don't want to talk to anyone at a cocktail party, do you then say that you're a clinical psychologist?
Yes, that's exactly what I do. And it keeps everybody quiet because everybody thinks I can figure out if they're depressed or anxious. It's perfect.
Well, you probably can, but you probably wouldn't. So what does it mean to you to live a bountiful life?
I think that's a great question. I think I have my own personal definition, but I also think I have something that I want everybody as far as sleep is concerned. So for me personally, if I live a bountiful life, I think that includes several different factors. So number one, gratitude. I feel very grateful for the abilities that I've been given, the opportunities that I've had, and it's really increased my level of understanding, exposure, learning. So I think gratitude is certainly one of the most important aspects of a bountiful life. Friendship and relationship. It's another big one for me. I don't have a lot of friends, but the friends that I have are very, very close. They know me very well. I'm very close with my wife and my children. And so I feel like that also really contributes to a bountiful life. I'm a big exerciser. And that gives me a lot of joy, but it also gives me a lot of physical energy. And I've learned, I'm 57 years old, and at 57, I've discovered that if I work out every day, I feel really good, and that allows me to do the other things that I want to do to feel good. So I think that's it. And then, of course, if I'm being honest, sleep has got to be in there, because if you're exhausted during the day, you don't even know you have a bountiful life, right? You're so exhausted you can't even identify it, right? And so I'd say those are 4 areas would be big for me. And then to expand for the rest of the world, I think those 4 areas would probably work well. But I think that people don't realize how much sleep has an impact on how we view the world, positively, negatively, things like that, right? If you haven't slept well, I'm going to be honest with you, everything out there looks awful, right? You know what I mean? Like, nobody's doing things the way you want them to do it. You don't like this. You don't like, when you're tired, you're exhausted. You're not happy about anything. So I really want people to think, could you include sleep in your definition of a bountiful life?
We'll get into it a bit later, but one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, obviously with Bountiful, we talk about a lot of different topics because obviously to live a bountiful life, there's a lot of things to get not right, but to really investigate. And I have really struggled with my sleep for a really long time, but off the backdrop of when I was younger, my mum used to check if I was alive because I would get into bed, sleep like a statue, wake up, and I was good to go. Like, didn't move, didn't make a noise, good sleep. And then later in life, I just became a bit of a disaster. And then the impact of my sleep issues on my partner then started to have like really big, like sort of quality of life problems. And I'm sort of at the other end of it now where I've started to figure out some of the stuff going on. Maybe you'll give me some more insights. But
I hope I can.
I really am on the side of like understanding very deeply like the impact of not having good sleep, good rest, and the long-term impact of fatigue as well.
Yeah, a lot of people, number one, thank you for sharing that. That was very courageous and important for people to hear. A lot of people suffer silently, and they don't know that other people are out there struggling with the same things that you have been so fortunate to identify. So I'm glad you were able to do that, and hopefully some listeners can gain some solace from it. It can be a bit of a mystery, and it can feel like there are no answers. I'm glad to hear that you're coming through on the other side. May I ask, what are some of the problems that you had? Was it difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep? What kind of went on for you?
I would give 3 areas. 1, I'm a sleep talker.
Okay.
2, I was really restless, so that's a big one. And 3, my brain wouldn't switch off, but only when I had a job.
Okay.
Which was like quite interesting. I was like, well, I can't not work.
Right. That's not going to go over well with society, I don't think, unless you're independently wealthy.
Get into it a little bit later with all of the areas, but basically what I found, I did go to a sleep doctor, not the sleep doctor, but a sleep doctor, mild sleep apnea.
Okay.
They wanted me to wear a mouth guard. I didn't think that was the issue. Reduced my stress a lot, did a lot of techniques to try and quiet the brain, which actually did work.
Great.
Do you know the 2 things that made the biggest difference that took me about 4 years to figure out? 1, changing my pillow.
Absolutely.
2, I have really bad allergies. And so the allergies were actually causing the apnea. I just couldn't breathe. And so I got to the point where I had made all of the diet changes, all of the exercise changes. And I was kind of like,
at your environment.
It's like, there is nothing more that I can change without like not being a human being anymore, basically.
Right.
And so I went to my doctor and I said, can I get an allergy test? And then my allergy test turned up that I was like basically severely allergic to things in my environment, which made it so that I couldn't breathe. So did that dance. But then someone along the journey said, you should go get an x-ray of your nose and your sinuses. And then it turned out that I have chronic sinus disease. And so that's the snoring, the not sleeping.
Well, and you also have a very narrow nose.
Yeah.
Right? Like I can see from here. And so it's very narrow. And so it's again, just hard to get air up and in it. And especially when you're asleep and sleep apnea, that makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting that you bring this up. So first of all, I'm so glad that you had the experience that you did, but that you finally found a solution. I'm so sorry it took so long. What I'll tell you is that in my assessments, I have an entire page of questions about your environment. I ask how old your mattress is. I ask how old your pillow is. I ask which side you sleep on. I'm a big fan of putting air purifiers in bedrooms because let's be fair, it's the room you spend more time in than any other room in the house, right? And it's the room that usually has got the most dust. It's got the most stuff that's in there that can be those particulates that can be allergic. Also, a lot of times there's not a lot of air flow in the bedroom. So having a fan with an air purifier is kind of like a great double combination. Also, believe it or not, humidity can make a big difference, especially for somebody in your situation where nasal congestion was problematic. If the air is too dry, then your nose will react. If the air is too moist, then your nose will react. So around 40% humidity is what the data would suggest is kind of what we're looking for. But I will tell you, I've saved more people's sleep by switching out their pillow than any other single thing in my entire 26 years of treating people, because a lot of people don't even think about it, right? But this is an object that is moving your head in one direction or another, right? And that's where all your breathing is coming through and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad you figured it out. And to be clear, you don't look like somebody that would have sleep apnea, right? So normally when we see somebody with sleep apnea, number one, we usually think of them as men. But to be fair, plenty of women have sleep apnea, but usually we see it in people who are much bigger than you. You know, you're pretty tiny, right? And what people have to understand is sleep apnea is not just a man, big person disease, right? And all kinds of people can have sleep apnea. Now, the good news is yours was mild and it wasn't primary, meaning it came from allergies. And once you got rid of allergies, then in all likelihood, you got rid of apnea.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
What I would probably tell my 25-year-old self is fail often and quickly. And so I would say at 25, it's probably time to start kind of slowing down some of the partying and really taking a look at yourself physically, because here's the way I try to describe it to people is like, think of your body like a car, right? And you only get one car for your entire life, right? So my car is a 1968, because that's the year I was born, car, right? And so it's now 2025, which is 57 years later. If I didn't take good care of the car, I'm going to have even more problems as the years go by, right? And so people really at age 25 need to start maybe just think a little bit long term.
Yeah. And that's the whole spectrum of health, right? Not just physically, but also diet, those sorts of things.
100%, as well as mental health. And I would actually argue mental health is probably equally as important, if not more important than the physical, because your body is pretty resilient physically, but when mental health stuff kicks into gear, it's important to address it.
So you said sleep affects everything: emotions, energy, memory, even morality. In your view, how does sleep act as the foundation for all other parts of life?
So I think the way sleep acts as a foundation for all other parts of life is because it allows you to be attentive. When you're sleepy, you don't have attention. You miss details. You can't focus, and you can't move forward. So I think that sleep is so fundamental at allowing us to be able to perceive and receive data in, and be able to then make decisions on that data.
Yeah, interesting. And then can you talk a little bit about how it impacts our ability to feel joy, regulate our emotions, and build resilience?
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. Name me the last really tired person that was super smiley, happy, and joyful, because you probably can't. Not in your life or your family, right? It's so interesting, but the whole idea of happiness, the whole idea of joy, of feeling exuberance, of feeling good feelings, all of it gets tamped down if you haven't slept well, because your body can't actually react in a positive way. What's very interesting is the more sleep deprived you are, the more negative emotions seem to stack on board, right? As an example, if you remember back when you were having sleep difficulties, if you woke up in the middle of the night, right, you never had a positive thought about that. It was always like, oh, doggone it, I'm awake again. I can't believe this is happening. I'm going to have a terrible day tomorrow. I'm going to say something bad to my husband. I'm going to lose my job. Like, it just goes terrible, right? When none of that's true, right? But because you're in the middle of the night and you're so sleep deprived, it's the only thing that your brain seems to react to, right? And so what I try to explain to people is when you're sleep deprived, You can't experience the level of positivity in the emotion to get to joy. And that is what becomes problematic.
Do you think a lot of society's problems come from the fact that we're chronically sleep deprived? Like no amount of like gratitude and journaling and positive thinking or positive psychology, I think it's great, but like, is it really just a band-aid if we're not fundamentally sleeping?
Yes. So I completely believe that to be true.
Can we talk about some of the tiny changes that can make a huge impact? I know that you are quite big on these, like drinking water before coffee, getting morning light, moving your bedtime,
Yep.
etc.
So there are 5 that I think are critical for people. So first one is to wake up at the same time 7 days a week. All right. Let me explain the biology really quickly. So what happens is your core body temperature rises, gets to a peak, and then drops. When it drops, that's a signal to your brain to release melatonin. Okay. However, what ends up happening is then your core body temperature drops after that. At some point in time, it has to go north, right? Or you go hypothermic, so then it starts to heat up. But when you wake up in the morning time, sunlight hits your eye, right? And then turns off that melatonin faucet in your brain. And it sets a timer for 14 hours later. So if you're waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 14 hours later is 8 p.m. Takes about an hour and a half for it to get up and in. So about 9:30, you start to get tired. 10 o'clock, you go to bed, right? Very steady from Monday to Friday. However, if Saturday morning you sleep in by 2 hours, then melatonin is pushed by 2 hours Saturday night. So to be clear, what time you wake up, the consistency in the time you wake up is directly related to the consistency of your brain producing melatonin at the right time. So it's kind of like you have to wake up on time in order to go to bed on time. And so that's, if I told everybody one simple thing that you could do that would have a monstrous effect on your sleep, it would be that. It would be wake up at the same time 7 days a week. Now, the second one I'd like to talk about is caffeine, right? I'm a big fan. I want people to hydrate before they caffeinate, right? So a lot of people don't know this, but sleep in and of itself is a dehydrative event. You lose almost a full liter of water just from the humidity in your breath. And so when you wake up and you drink coffee, which is a diuretic, it's probably not the best idea. Don't get me wrong, you're still getting some water from that, but it would be much better if all you did was hydrate first, right? And wait for caffeine. There's another reason you would want to wait for caffeine, which is in order to wake up your brain, there's 2 hormones that increase dramatically. They're called adrenaline and cortisol. When they come up like that and your brain has got adrenaline and cortisol on it, it's so stimulating that when you add caffeine, it does almost no good. But if you just waited about 90 minutes after you woke up, the adrenaline and the cortisol drop, and then you add the caffeine, and then it actually works really, really well. So what I tell people is hydrate before you caffeinate, have your first cup of coffee 90 minutes after you wake up, right? Then on the other side of it, stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Why 2 p.m.? Caffeine has a half-life of between 6 and 8 hours. So if you stop at 2, 8 hours later is 10 o'clock at night, which means you should only have about half of the caffeine on board, which should allow you to fall asleep. You need to limit your caffeine to 2 cups a day if you possibly can. Okay, that's step number 2. Step number 3 has to do with alcohol. So I'll be honest with you, I have negotiations about alcohol with almost every single person that I talk to. To be clear, alcohol's terrible for your sleep. It's not good for your health in general, but it's really bad for your sleep. I'm not a teetotaler. I don't have any problem with alcohol. You want to have beer, wine, bourbon, I don't care. But what I am going to care about is I want you to stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. Why? Well, it takes the average human body approximately 1 hour to digest 1 alcoholic beverage. So if you have 2 glasses of wine with dinner, and then let's say you stop and you wait for 3 hours, it will be out of your system enough so that you'll be able to fall asleep, and it will not poorly affect the most important stages of sleep, which are stage 3, 4 for physical restoration and stage REM for mental restoration. So step number 3, stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. Step number 4 is exercise. Exercise every day, okay? But you don't have to run a marathon. I'm talking about 20 minutes of cardio, walk walk your dog, go to the mailbox, whatever it is, but don't do it too close to bedtime because that will increase your core body temperature. So step number 4 is to exercise daily, but to stop 4 hours before bed. Number 5 is for the morning time. I ask people, when you wake up in the morning, do me a favor, drink your water standing outside in the direct sunlight and get 15 minutes of sunshine. Why? Sunlight, when it hits your eye, as we were talking about in step number 1, turns off that melatonin faucet and helps clear brain fog. So in summary, step number 1, have 1 wake up time 7 days a week. Step number 2, stop caffeine by 2 p.m., but hopefully hydrate before you caffeinate. Step number 3 is to stop alcohol 3 hours before bed, limit yourself to 2 drinks. Step number 4 is to exercise daily, but stop exercise 4 hours before bed. And step number 5 is to get some 15 minutes of sunshine every morning.
Sounds so simple, but we as humans get in the way of ourselves, correct?
Yes, we do.
What are some of the signs that someone isn't getting enough sleep?
So it's interesting. One of the signs, there's some things that people might not expect. So as an example, how many times you hit the snooze button is a really good indicator of how much sleep you're getting. If you hit it more than once, you are not getting enough sleep. Another interesting indicator, how quickly you fall asleep. So a lot of people say, oh, I fall asleep, before my head hits the pillow. That is not a good sign. That means you are sleep deprived, right? That you're not getting good quality or quantity of sleep. The obvious ones are, my eyes are red, I feel logy, I feel fatigued, I'm tired, I can't keep my eyes open, my performance is off, things like that. But a lot of people don't even realize that they're sleep deprived because they're caffeinating so much. So it's good to have some of these other indicators like the snooze button or how quickly you fall asleep.
Can we talk a little bit about the concept of sleep debt, what it is, and maybe then we can talk about some of the things about it?
Sure. So sleep debt is an interesting concept. It goes in and out of favor within sleep doctors quite often. But here's the basics of it is you think of sleep the same way you think of a bank account. And so you take 8 hours out every night, and then supposedly you put them back. And if you don't put back the entire 8, what's left is a sleep debt. Okay. And then in theory, you should have to make up for that debt. Okay. So let me tell you why it's an interesting idea, but it really doesn't do justice in terms of the research that's out there. So first of all, it's not a 1-for-1 makeup, right? So first of all, not everybody needs 8 hours and nobody needs the exact same amount of sleep every single night, right? So what people need to think about is before you go to bed, your body basically scans itself and it says, okay, here are the things that happened today. There's some physical things that we need to fix. There's some mental things that we need to process. This is how much sleep we need. This is how much REM. This is how much deep. Okay, ready, set, go, right? So your brain looks at that. So it's different every single night because your emotions are different, or you did different physical stuff, or your body just has different needs. For example, being female, depending upon where you are in your menstrual cycle, could absolutely positively change exactly how much sleep you need or don't need. So people have to start really kind of thinking about sleep debt more on the individual side of things. And the way I tell people to do that is don't count hours or minutes because you get too caught up in that. When you wake up in the morning, how do you feel? Okay. If within 30 seconds to a minute you feel bright-eyed and ready to go, then you don't have any sleep debt. Then you're probably doing well, right? But if you're hitting the snooze, it's 2, 3, 4 times, right? You've got tremendous sleep debt. There's no question about it.
Is there a way that someone can sort of understand their own sleep rhythm if it's every day and kind of understand oh, I think I need 10 hours tonight or something?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I would say is there's a couple of ways to do that. One is with a tracker, right? So there are trackers out there like Oura Ring or Whoop Strap or different devices that you can wear, what we call wearables. Those will monitor your sleep. But to be fair, they're not very accurate. They're okay. They're better than nothing, but they're not very accurate. Personally, what I do for my patients is I have them use what's called a sleep diary. So it's just a piece of paper, and each day you answer a few questions about your sleep, and then it gives you a nice spreadsheet. at the end of the week. And then you can start to look at it and then make some determinations. And I teach my patients how to look at that data and say, okay, I need a little bit more sleep, or I need a little bit less sleep, or things like that. So I think you can track it by using a wearable or a paper pencil sleep diary.
And then sort of last point on this is there, if someone isn't getting enough sleep or is in a period of undersleeping, is there a way to recover? Like, what is the best way to recover?
So it depends upon the situation and the scenario, right? So as an example, what we don't usually do is tell people, okay, I want you to sleep, 2 10-hour nights over the weekend, right? Because our bodies aren't necessarily built for that. And so what I try to do is when somebody is very, very sleep deprived, what I try to do is say to them, hey, can we get, an uninterrupted 7 hours a night for 10 nights in a row? And we schedule something like that. And then that allows them to kind of make up for their sleep. And then we can start based on at the end of that kind of 10 days, right? Of allowing their body to get whatever sleep that they need. Kind of like doing a vacation, right? Like you were mentioning earlier that you sleep better when you're not working, right? And so same holds true for everybody. So if you could take a vacation to be able to regularize your sleep. Believe it or not, in Australia, there are people who actually take vacation just to get more sleep.
Yeah, I believe it. As long as the bed is good, though, and the conditions are right, which most hotels don't optimize for these days, but that's a rant.
No, I don't disagree with you there. I think hotel sleeping can have its pros and cons. Although you and your husband do something that I think is great, which is bring your own pillow. So many people don't bring their own pillow, and then they have neck problems, or they just don't get a good night's sleep. And when you're spending money on vacation in some luxurious spot, the last thing that you want is to get a crappy night's sleep or have a crick in your neck while you're trying to go down the water slide or whatever fun thing you're doing.
So moving into the psychology of sleep, what do you think most people misunderstand about the psychology of sleep?
I think that what most people don't understand is that most sleep problems are a result of self-imposed anxiety. Okay, so let me give you an example, right? And so we mentioned an example. Like many people tell me that they fall asleep just fine, but they wake up somewhere between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and they get what's called monkey mind. I think you even mentioned it a little bit yourself, right? It's just this ongoing thoughts and thoughts and thoughts, right? And so what ends up happening, as we said earlier, is those thoughts are almost always negative. And so that becomes, again, problematic for people to be able to, get a good night's rest and be able to kind of function the next day.
What are some of the cognitive distortions you see in people with insomnia or poor sleep?
The biggest one I see is that people think that either their lack of sleep is going to take years off the back end of their lives, which there's no data to suggest that whatsoever, or they feel like it's going to have a major repercussion on their health, which can happen. However, you'd have to have tremendous sleep deprivation. Like you'd have to only be sleeping for like 2 hours a night for weeks at a time before you'd really start to see, your body starting to shut down and processes not starting to work and things like that. But yeah, we do see cognitive distortions where people spin up an idea and it's worse than it really is, in real life. Another cognitive distortion is if I take a pill every night, it'll give me great sleep, right? That's not true either, right? Because pills can only give you a certain amount of sleep and they can only give you a certain quality of sleep. I want to be very clear. There's nothing wrong with taking a pill to sleep. If you and your doctor have come together and said, I need to use a medication for sleep, there's no shame in that. There are lots of people out there who, even my patients, who take pills to sleep. I got no problems with it. But if you're not comfortable on medication, I think that's a different story. And I think that's where you need to talk with your doctor about maybe coming off meds.
This is actually totally related, but can we talk a little bit about over-pathologizing sleep problems and the impact of underlying habits and emotional stresses?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people over-pathologize sleep-related issues. They think they're worse than they are. Here's the thing. Sleep is flexible, right? It's like our bodies bounce back from a lot. And so a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, if you're not sleeping, all of these terrible things are going to happen. The likelihood is that your body really does, handle all that on its own. It's very little unbelievably large long-term consequences. Now, I will say, if you already have a disorder, for example, like cancer, right? And you're not sleeping well, that will absolutely make the cancer worse. Okay. So, I mean, that's not a form of over pathologizing. That's just explaining how sleep deprivation can affect other disease states, right? So I want to be very, very clear that yes, there are some people who overdiagnose themselves as having sleep problems, but if you have other medical problems and you don't sleep well, it's important that you start to sleep well because it will absolutely have an effect on those other pathologies.
That's also because we heal in our sleep, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's called recovery.
Why is it so hard for some people to fall asleep even when they're exhausted?
It's mostly anxiety. Here's the thing is I could have you go on a 20-mile bike ride, be physically exhausted, and about to lie down into bed, and I could utter one sentence and I could keep you awake all night long, right? I could say, you have cancer, right? And I use this as an example because your mind is very powerful. It can override almost anything. And so the idea here is that our mind, when it's telling us all of these anxieties, is not necessarily accurate. And that overrides all of the systems which keep us awake. So we really have to start to say to ourselves, you really can't trust your brain in the middle of the night because it's always going to be negative and it's always going to be telling you negative stuff. And so you have to just, accept that you've woken up, try to put a positive spin on it, try to get yourself back to sleep. Or I like to use meditation and breath work in the middle of the night for a lot of my patients, and it works really well.
Maybe it's time to sort of skip ahead and talk about your chronotype styles.
Sure.
So you got the lion, the bear, the wolf, and the dolphin. Can we talk a little bit about these and what they mean?
Yeah. And so it turns out that everybody has an internal circadian rhythm. And some people are early and some people are late. We used to call them early birds and night owls. And it turns out that is actually genetic. So I wrote a book called The Power of When, WHEN, meaning when in the day do you do something like go to bed or wake up or have a hamburger or what have you. And what we discovered was that genetically, so if I looked at your 23andMe data or your Ancestry.com data, I could actually look on your genome and I can tell you with a fair degree of certainty, hey, you are genetically an early bird, which means you like to wake up around 5:30, 6 o'clock. You like to go to bed around 9:30 at night versus I can genetically see you're a night owl. And so the opposite is true. You like to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning and sleep until noon the next day. And you can literally see this on each individual genome. And so I said to myself, let's figure out a way without having to draw blood and do all these genomic testing to figure out if we can help people identify which sleep cycle or schedule that they have. Are they early? Are they in the middle? Are they late? Or are they irregular, meaning it's up and down, up and down? And so we discovered a way to do it, and we figured it all out. And then I was writing a book about it. And when I was writing the book, I was sitting in my publisher's office, and she said, well, what do you want to make each one of the categories? And I was like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, should they be colors? Should they be crystals? Should they be, because we're trying to figure out, how to market the book and what would make sense and things like that. And I turned to her and I said, I think I want it to be animals, and I don't want it to be birds, right? And I want to have animals that actually represent the chronotype, right? And so lions wake up before dawn, and that's when they hunt. So if you're an early bird, you're now a lion. Because let's be fair, who wouldn't want to be the king or queen of the jungle, right? It's kind of the best part. If in the middle, you're a bear, kind of like a teddy bear, right? You like to get up around 7:30, start to get tired around 9 o'clock, or you're a night owl or a wolf, right? We know wolves are nocturnal creatures. They hunt at night. These are the people that like to go to bed late and stay up late. And then the irregularities are the dolphins. Now, people always ask, why dolphins? Like every other one kind of made sense, Michael, but why did you choose dolphins? So it turns out that dolphins sleep unihemispherically. So half of their brain is asleep while the other half is awake and looking for predators because, they're constantly swimming. And I felt like that kind of sounds like somebody with insomnia, like half their brain is asleep and half their brain isn't. So that's kind of why I chose dolphins. So the naming of each category is based on animals that actually represent the chronotypes. And the chronotypes themselves are ones that have been around science since the early 70s.
I think I'm a bear.
Yeah, most people, 50% of people are bears. And honestly, I wish I was a bear. I'm a wolf. And it's awful because like I'm up till, I used to be up until 12:30, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning every single night. And then I'd have to be up early, to go see patients and things like that. So it was hard. By the way, it changes over time, right? And so everybody is every one of the chronotypes. So if you think about it, when you're a baby, you're a lion, right? You go to bed really early, wake up really early when you got an infant, right? When you got a toddler, somebody in middle school, then they're a bear. Adolescent, 13-year-old, what do most 13-year-olds want to do? Stay up late and sleep late. So they're all wolves, right? Then you hit about 20, 22 years old, and your chronotype sticks for about 40 years. And then it starts to go backwards. So I don't know if your parents are still alive, but if they are, and you said to them, hey, mom, dad, let's go have dinner, what time would they want to have dinner? Like,
my mum's definitely a lion.
So, right, like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is people actually start to go backwards a little bit as you get older. So we all experience most of the chronotypes. The most problematic chronotype is the dolphin, and they usually represent my insomniac. So it sounds like you used to be a dolphin, but now with your new pillow, you're a bear.
One of the reasons why I really like this, and I think I've heard you say before that not everyone thrives on the same schedule. And what I love about that is it's like so freeing in a way, and also knowing that you can be any one of these types throughout your life. I think sometimes like it kind of comes back to the anxiety, like being so rigid and maybe not necessarily understanding how we move through life can lead us to actually not sleeping that well.
Exactly. You nailed it. You hit the nail on the head right with that comment. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Can we talk briefly about how knowing your chronotype and your animal sleep persona changes how someone might approach rest, energy, and maybe their daily rhythm?
Sure. So what's great about it is, number one, once you know your chronotype, you know what time to go to bed and what time to wake up. So that's really helpful right then and there. But it's not just that. I can teach you what time you should eat so that you don't gain weight. I can teach you what time you should exercise so you have better performance. It's actually quite remarkable. The chapter, I have to admit, that is the most popular in the book is what's the best time for sex. I get more questions about that than just about anything. And we actually, looked at it and understand it now. And so what I want people to understand is almost any behavior that you do, there's a time of day where your hormones are naturally at a height where you would do that activity better. And so what I've been able to do is identify those times based on those chronotypes. And so what's kind of cool is you can look at almost anything. I've figured out the best time of day to have a cheeseburger, have sex, ask your boss for a raise. We have a whole chapter on work, when to email, things like that. And just to be clear, like there are over 220 research studies in the book. Like there are people who are studying circadian rhythms all over the world, not just me.
How does that work? Say if you're in a relationship and you have two people with different chronotypes.
One's an early bird and one's a night owl. When do you have sex? When do you go to bed? It's not easy. There's a lot of negotiating.
Food, exercise, caffeine, even socializing. How do they interact with the chronotype, and what should people pay attention to?
So it's important. So first of all, I don't want people to get overwhelmed with all the chronotype information. So the best place to start is with sleep and sex, right? So I tell people those two things first. So if you sleep every night, look at the times for your chronotype. If you have a partner and are intimate, or you're by yourself and you're intimate, follow the guidelines and start with those two things first, right? And the next thing I tell people to do is look at caffeine, right? And when are you drinking caffeine based on your chronotype? That's another important thing. Then I ask them to look at alcohol, right? Because that's another important factor in overall health. Hopefully it's low. We're not big fans of alcohol. Alcohol really destroys sleep and is really not good for health in general. And then you start to work more into the daily behaviors. So exercise, when to eat, things of that nature. And so if you look in the book, there's actually a very nice progression that we developed for people so that it doesn't get overwhelming. But you can actually apply it to almost any area of your life that you want.
Do you know what it reminds me of is, when you're trying to do like time zone maths with someone on the other side of the world and you get the
Exactly.
time zones up and you're like, these ones are great.
Exactly. You got it. You nailed it.
Can we talk a little bit about the importance of safety, emotional, physical, nervous system safety, and allowing the body to rest?
I love that topic. Very few people ask me about that topic, and I think it's arguably the most important topic when it comes to sleep. I believe in my heart of hearts that if you have fear, you will not sleep. Think about it, right? You're at the most vulnerable position you could possibly be in. Your eyes are closed, it's dark, you have no idea what's going on. There's kind of a level of sensory deprivation. You are vulnerable as an entity, as a human. If you don't feel safe, how do you sleep? Right? And
Yeah,
safety comes in a lot of different forms, right? So, and I'm not just talking about physical safety, right? Like versus like somebody breaking in, God forbid, or partner abuse or something like that. I'm not just talking about that. That's a huge factor. But what about emotional safety, right? Like what if you're in a relationship with somebody who's being mentally abusive, right? How does that affect you? Does that make you feel safe? What about financial safety, right? What if you got bills over your head? What again, all of these fears are the things that occupy your brain, raise your anxiety, and make it difficult to sleep. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about is the actual mechanism of action, or why does anxiety prevent us from sleeping? And it's actually a very simple answer. It has everything to do with heart rate. So, in order to enter into a state of unconsciousness, most people require a heart rate of 60 or below. Okay. So, when you are not beating your heart at 60 or below because you're anxious, because you're fearful, because you're nervous, you can't sleep. Right. But people ask me all the time, well, how do people sleep who've got all this stress in their lives? How do people sleep who are making, billion-dollar decisions and healthcare decisions about people's life? How do people sleep? And it's because their heart rate doesn't go up. They manage their anxiety, they manage their stress, and that lowered heart rate allows almost anybody to be able to fall asleep. But fear causes an elevation in heart rate. And so if we can attack the fear and get rid of the fear, almost anybody sleeps. And that is actually one of the most fundamental aspects to how I treat people is when we get through the scheduling and we figure out what time to go to bed and what time to get up, and we get through the cognitive distortions of thinking these, then we get to the real heart of the matter, which is, what are you afraid of?
It had sort of never occurred to me that like financial fear could be obviously it's going to be a stressor, but I hadn't really linked the two together in terms of the psychological safety aspect of it. And then on top of that, the usual reaction is not dealing with the fear, it's prescribing something. It's like, oh, I need to sleep, so I'm going to have medication, rather than dealing with the root cause. I mean, some people need the medication, obviously, but I sort of wonder if we stood back sometimes and were like, actually, we need to deal with the fear problem rather than the sleep problem, which is caused by the fear, would be in a better position.
I think you're 100% correct. I wish we could start to understand that, because, and also there's another kind of anecdotal reason why we know this to be true, which is when you look at the history of every sleep medication that's ever been prescribed or developed, every one of them was an anxiety medication first. Every single one. So we know where this comes from, right? This comes from fear. This comes from anxiety. And to be fair, there's depression can do something somewhat similar. So I don't want to just harp only on the anxious stress of it all, but depression can also cause a fair amount of sleep related issues. And let's be fair, most people with depression have coexisting anxiety as well. I've rarely met somebody who's just depressed.
Which you can say as a psychologist and a sleep doctor.
I know, exactly.
Can we talk a little bit about the body-sleep connection? So what's the link between gut health and sleep, and how do things like inflammation, digestion, or blood sugar affect our ability to rest?
So there's new data, but I'll be very honest with you. I don't think we have the complete answer here. I think here's what we know. is the microbiome or the bacteria, the billions of bacteria that are in your gut. First of all, we do know that they do seem to run on a circadian rhythm. So there is a circadian rhythm to all of the bacteria that's in here. Now, secondarily, there's something that people have been looking at for the past 4 or 5 years called leaky gut syndrome, right? So leaky gut has to do with this idea that you're inflamed and your gut leaks into the system, which causes even more inflammation, and it just progressively gets worse and worse and worse and worse. I think that's probably true. However, it feels like everything causes inflammation, right? Like I'm reading the literature, and it's like you can't do shit out there without it causing some level of inflammation for you. And so I think we have to take that data a little bit with a grain of salt and say, if you're diagnosed with leaky gut, it's probably affecting your sleep. And so you should fix your leaky gut. And then there's a high likelihood that whatever sleep problem that was being affected by your gut goes away. I think that is definitely a true statement. Do I believe inflammation causes sleep problems? I think it does. I wouldn't be surprised if sleep apnea, right, couldn't be an inflammatory, some level of inflammatory. Think about you, right? Your sinuses. What happened to your sinuses? Whack! They inflamed, right? So again, we can see it even on the biology side of you and your situation, which was this inflammation of the sinuses leading to sleep apnea, hence a sleep problem. And you correctly figured out it was your pillow and the particulates. And as soon as you're going to get surgery. I can't wait to hear what's going to happen, by the way. I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Well, hopefully my husband gets more sleep, and maybe hopefully I will too. It's very hard to live a bountiful life if you don't feel bountiful, which you need sleep for.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more.
The gut plays a role in producing neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA. Can we talk a little bit about that?
I can. I don't know. It's not my area of specialty, but what I can tell you is approximately 80% of the serotonin and melatonin that is created in your gut. Many people don't know it, but melatonin is not just a circadian pacemaker. It's actually a very powerful antioxidant. And in some cases, that was actually used during COVID to help many people from an inflammation standpoint there. So it is kind of interesting to start to see what some of these things are doing.
How does oral health and nasal obstruction, things like mouth breathing, jaw shape, or chronic sinus issues influence sleep quality?
Yeah. So we talked about the sinuses with you, but let's talk about mouth taping and jaws and things like that for just half a second. So first of all, I want to be very clear. Mouth taping is a bad idea. Okay? Bad, right? Why? Because most people have never been tested for sleep apnea. And so when you tape your mouth shut and you've got sleep apnea, you just make the apnea worse. And you make the apneic events worse. Believe it or not, there was a recent meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is a statistical review of many papers out there so that we can kind of get to the bottom and answer the question, yes or no, for whatever it is we're looking at. And they did a meta-analysis on 20 studies of mouth taping. And they discovered that no, it does not appear to be effective. And people have died taping their mouth. So it's really a stupid idea. Just think about it, right? Like, it's really a stupid idea. Now, what can we do instead? Well, we can use oral appliances. And so you mentioned it briefly when you said that you talked about having sleep apnea. But for folks who don't know what that is, historically, the way we would treat sleep apnea is we would put a mask on your face. There would be a tube that goes to an air compressor called a CPAP machine. And it would basically push air up your nose. And when it would hit the area of obstruction, it would just open it up, shoot air to your lungs. Problematic because you're sleeping with a mask on your face all night long. It's basically like a hair dryer blowing up your nose all night long. It's not a lot of fun. It's certainly uncomfortable. And it really only works really well for people with super severe sleep apnea. You had mild sleep apnea. And so your doctor talked to you about an oral appliance. So what that is it's like a mouth guard, like what you see the football players wear, but it's an upper and a lower. And then the lower is pushed slightly forward. And what it does, if you can see, is it pushes my jaw forward and opens up my posterior airway space. So instead of air pushing your throat open, we move the jaw forward to push the throat open. So that's another way that people can do that. And basically, oral care, A lot of people have no idea, but your mouth actually has a microbiome as well. And so you have to be thoughtful about what's going on in here in terms of bacteria. And so if you don't floss, as an example, and the bacteria gets into the gum, that bacteria goes straight into the bloodstream. And now you've got the inflammation all over again. So even if you were treating your leaky gut, if you're not flossing your teeth, you could end up with other problems. And so it turns out, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't really realize this until much later in my career. But one of the things I'm asking everybody about is like, do you floss? And people look at me like I'm crazy, like you're a sleep doctor. Why are you asking me if I floss? When I explain the relationship, they start to think about it and they're like, oh, I had no idea. And so we're trying to get more people interested in that area of study as well.
Before we get into some of the sleep identity and relationship stuff, I mean, we have sort of covered it a little bit. Someone who maybe is having trouble sleeping, there's a lot of information to take in. Where do you suggest that they sort of start? And like, I don't necessarily want someone to have to go through my experience where it took me like 4 years and a lot of anxiety and like relationship strife to sort of get to the bottom of it.
So step number one is we have to determine what you think you have. Okay. Like if it's a biology problem or a psychology problem, right? So if it's apnea, narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, you're sleepwalker, sleep talker, like traditional sleep disorders, that's usually a medical doctor, usually a sleep doctor. But if it's more insomnia, difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, then that's more of a psychology issue. And so you would bifurcate there, and you might go to a psychologist for insomnia stuff and a MD for more of the apnea stuff. But then the first question is like, well, how do I know which one of those two I have, Michael? So what I would do is I would look up online, what are the symptoms? Like you could actually, believe it or not, nowadays with ChatGPT, you could actually go to ChatGPT, list out all of your symptoms. It's actually not that bad. Like it would probably come back with an idea like, if you wrote, I snore and my spouse saw me stop breathing and I'm tired, it could very easily come back and say, you might be surprised to know you could potentially have a case of sleep apnea. This is the type of doctor you need to go see. Do you want me to help you make an appointment? Like that's not an unrealistic thing to try to accomplish. If it were me, I would tell you go to my website, thesleepdoctor.com. Go to the search bar and you can type in insomnia, you can type in apnea, you can type in I don't sleep good. All of those things will help bring you to articles and videos that should help walk you down the path. But that's kind of the reason I developed the site to begin with, was really to have a place for people to go with non-biased information where they can learn like, what are the next steps? What do I need to do? Because I'm not really trying to sell you anything. I'm just giving you information.
All right, sleep identity and relationships. What happens psychologically when someone starts to identify as a bad sleeper?
You ask really good questions. You're welcome. They become a really bad sleeper. And I would argue that their sleep actually gets worse the more they talk about how bad their sleep is. In fact, I would argue that it's a bad idea to wander around telling people that you're an insomniac. I think because all you're doing is basically self-perpetuating the myth, right? Versus, saying, hey, I've got some challenges with sleep, but I'm working on them and I'm trying to make them better. And I'm going to do, this step, this step, this step. But because here's what people do is they use it as an excuse, right? For poor performance. Right? For everything, right? So, got a terrible night's sleep last night. I'm so sorry I was late for our meeting. Or, terrible night's sleep last night. So sorry I didn't accomplish those goals, and it becomes like you're kind of a loser, like you can't sleep, you can't work, you can't, and you start to believe that. And I would argue that that's a very dangerous place to be. I don't think, like, don't get me wrong, talk to if you think you're a bad sleeper, talk to your doctor about it, but it shouldn't be like, hi, my name's Michael, I'm a bad sleeper. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's probably a bad idea.
What's your top tip for healing your sleep identity?
I think acceptance. I think just being able to accept the fact that you are who you are. Everybody's sleep is different. And your sleep isn't right and your sleep isn't wrong. It's just whatever you need to get for you. And I think if you can take the judgment off yourself, like, got a bad night's sleep again. Here's what's going to happen to me. And you just said, okay, this is the amount of sleep that my body wanted. It's time to get up and start my day. I think you're going to do a lot better off.
So we have sort of talked about feeling ashamed with when our sleep issues start to affect our partner. What advice do you give people navigating that type of guilt?
So I think the easiest way to avoid that type of guilt is to just be open and honest with your partner, right? And say, like, I'm having a hard time here. I know I talk about this a lot. Can we maybe say that every Thursday at 3:00, we're going to have a talk about my sleep, and then the rest of the time, you know what I'm saying? Like, you just start to negotiate through and you start to work through with people. And I think that's kind of the best way to do it in most cases.
How can couples approach mismatched sleep rhythms, snoring, or stress-related night habits in a way that protects their connection?
So education is key, communication is key, and then really identifying who's got the problem and who's going to take responsibility for it, right? So, if your bed partner is snoring, it's not your problem that they are snoring. It's their problem that they are snoring, right? And so you have to get people to identify whose problem it is and who's going to take care of it.
Is it okay to sleep separately? And how do you do that without damaging intimacy?
Great question. So my wife and I probably don't sleep in the same bed 3 nights a week. Look, she likes to sleep with the bulldogs in the bed, with the TV on, the whole thing. I like it to be different. And so, but I still like sleeping with her. So on the weekends, I sleep with her, like Thursday through Sunday, and then Monday through Wednesday, I may sleep in the guest room because I've got a podcast I'm doing, or I've got something that I want, you know what I'm saying? So I don't think there's a problem with it. I think the real issue is people need to understand that the strength of your relationship has nothing to do with where you sleep, right? So you can sleep in separate bedrooms and still have just as strong a relationship as you do if you're sleeping right next to each other, as long as you're thoughtful about it, make sure you don't forget about intimacy, and, you should be okay.
Some of your newer work seems to incorporate things like breath work, hydration, and nervous system regulation into sleep programs. What's driving that shift, and how do these elements support better rest?
What drove the shift was so many people come up to me and they're like, I don't know what to do. Like, wellness has gotten so complicated. Do I get a green drink? Do I jump in a sauna? Do I have a cold plunge? Like, I don't know. And so I felt like it was important to start thinking about what are the basics? How do we get back to the basics? You can't get much more basic than sleeping, hydration, and breathing. Those were kind of the 3 things that I came upon that I wanted to really create a program around. And so that's what I did, is I wrote a book called Sleep, Drink, Breathe, Wellness is Too Complicated, and really looked at each one of those areas: sleep, hydration, breath work, which is how we regulate our nervous system. It was a great journey. Every time I write a book, I learn a ton. And I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about hydration, things like sip, don't gulp. People have no idea why you shouldn't gulp water, but because it just goes straight through you. It barely gets absorbed. But if you sip it, it kind of absorbs in. Things like that, I think, became very important to me, just understanding the basics of wellness. Because if I want to lead a bountiful life, a joyful life, like, if you ain't sleeping, if you don't hydrate it, and you're not breathing, you're not going to lead too good of a life.
Amazing. So quick fire questions.
Okay.
What, in your opinion, is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Most underrated fruit or vegetable? I like grapefruit.
Favorite cocktail?
A Manhattan with my own choice of bourbon.
Worst meal that your parents ever made you eat?
Liver and onions.
Oof.
It was awful.
Word that describes your life?
Word that describes my life. Good.
What are you most proud of?
Oh, wow. Probably my kids. I've got great kids. I've been very fortunate, and I get a lot of pride in kind of seeing them and watching them do some of the things that they do.
Do you have any tenets or principles that you live by, and it's not sleep related?
I'm pretty regimented. So I follow a fairly strict schedule every day. My morning routine is crazy. Like, I wake up between 5:45 and 6:15 just naturally, because now I'm kind of starting to become a lion. And I spend a lot of time with my dogs in the morning, and then I meditate with my dogs on my lap. That's kind of a different thing that I do. And then my breath kind of follows them. I do breath work in the morning. Then we go for a walk. Then I hit the gym pretty hard. Then I come back and make breakfast. And, those are my days. Start meetings at around 10:30, 11, and really kind of roll through my days that way. So I've probably done a decent job of just regimenting myself into kind of my existence. But I do leave room for innovation and surprises and fun new stuff. My daughter is interested in golf, so we've been hitting the golf range lately and checking that out.
What is one thing in your life that's really mattered more than you realized?
Meditation, I would say, is probably one of the big things. I meditated every morning for a couple of years, and then I stopped. I'm not really sure why I stopped. And about a year after I stopped, I really noticed that I was agitated more. I wasn't as calm. I wasn't as open and accepting of ideas. And I thought it could be the meditation that was lacking. And so I picked it back up again. And I was surprised to find it really works. And I'm not talking like I'm some yogi and I'm sitting there like I don't know how to do all that stuff. I do 20 minutes of a meditation where I have a headband and it tells me exactly what to do, and I'm following along. And it really is nice. I think that's one of those hidden gems that I never really thought about, but I've really made a practice almost daily.
What's something that you thought mattered but realized that it didn't matter?
Celebrity and fame.
What's one thing in your toolkit for when you're having a hard day?
Probably exercise. That's probably the biggest thing that I utilize in terms of stress reduction. Either exercise or breath work would probably be the two things when I'm having a really hard day.
Amazing. Last question is, in all your years of research and patient work, what have you learned about what it means to be truly well rested?
When you're truly well rested, you can hit a flow state and you can do almost anything. It's remarkable. When you're not well rested, you'll never get there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us on the Bountiful podcast. It's been wonderful having you here with us today and learning from all of your amazing insights.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I hope I get the opportunity to lead a bountiful life.
Amazing. Thank you.
Take care. Sweet dreams.